He looked harmless until he didn't. There was something peaceful about that Saturday morning in Sycamore Ridge. The kind of morning that made you believe the world had finally decided to slow down and take a breath. The scent of fresh-cut grass floated lazily through the air, carried by a breeze that ruffled flags and made the chimes on our front porch sing. Barbecue smoke curled from a few backyards, and somewhere down the street, a kid's bicycle bell chimed like a forgotten memory. Grandpa Hank sat in his favorite cedar rocking chair, the one with the worn cushion and that faint squeak on the right side, gently moving in rhythm with the wind. In one hand, he held a chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Grandpa," and in the other, a half-eaten oatmeal cookie. He was humming something tuneless under his breath, staring off toward the road like he was watching a slow-moving thought drift by. To most folks, Hank Delaney was just that Grandpa Hank. A quiet old man with soft eyes and a habit of trailing off mid-story. People said time had dulled him, and maybe that was true. He sometimes forgot names, misplaced the year, and occasionally called me by my father's name. But we knew better. Or at least we should have. That morning, life moved on like it always did. I was trimming the hedges out front. Mom was in the kitchen baking lemon bars for the church fundraiser. And my little nephew Tyler was sprawled out on the walkway with chalk, drawing what he proudly called a T-Rex but looked more like a mutant potato with arms. Grandpa watched him with that same sleepy half-smile. Then came the sound tires crunching gravel. A sleek black SUV rolled slowly down the street and stopped right in front of our house. No markings, no plates. The windows were so deeply tinted they reflected the sky like a mirror. The stillness that followed wasn't natural. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin tighten. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to pause. Two men stepped out. Both wore Navy tactical uniforms with bright vests that read Neighborhood Compliance Officer. Not police, not security. Just that. Their boots hit the pavement like gavel strikes, timed and intentional. The taller one had a narrow face and sharp eyes. The other looked like a walking refrigerator with a buzzcut and a jaw like a brick. Tyler looked up from his chalk dinosaur and asked, "Are they soldiers, Mommy?" "No, baby," Mom said gently. "Go inside now." My gut was already knotted. Something about the way they moved, too stiff, too deliberate, made every nerve in my body stand at attention. They didn't look at me. Their eyes were locked on Grandpa Hank. "Is this your grandpa?" the tall one asked, loud enough for half the block to hear. "Yeah," I said, confused. "Why?" The fridge-shaped man snorted. "Looks like he barely knows where he is. Regulations say if a resident can't manage their faculties, they become a liability. You might want to keep your liabilities inside." I blinked. "Excuse me." Grandpa Hank turned his head slowly. His eyes squinted at the men like they were flies on his sandwich. He didn't speak. Not yet. "What's your name, old man?" the tall one asked with a smirk. Silence. "He probably thinks it's 1972 and he's storming Vietnam," the buzzcut said, chuckling. That's when I noticed Grandpa's hand no longer idly rubbing his cookie. His thumb had stopped. His jaw was clenched. His eyes, usually fogged over with the haze of old age, had cleared. "I've been called a lot of things," Grandpa Hank said, his voice gravelly and low. "But never by folks who didn't earn the right." The smirks faltered. The tall one reached into his vest and pulled out a clipboard. "You're in violation. Overgrown hedges, unapproved decorations, that weird eagle sculpture on your porch. You can either sign this citation or we'll initiate a property seizure." "Wait a second," I stepped forward. "Back up," the buzzcut snapped. "This is a compliance action. You don't want to escalate this." They were in our yard. Then the buzzcut leaned in close to Grandpa's ear and whispered something. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw what it did. The chair stopped rocking. Hank's eyes narrowed. He stood. Fast. Too fast. "You boys ever serve?" he asked, his voice suddenly precise. The tall one chuckled. "Yeah, we serve notices." Grandpa Hank smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a mirror right before the power went out. He moved. In one breathless second, the clipboard snapped in half against the tall man's neck. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. Buzzcut shouted something and reached for his hip too slow. Grandpa twisted his arm, locked it at the elbow, and spun him into the porch post. The crack of his skull echoed like a bat hitting a baseball. Everything stopped. Even the wind. Tyler stood frozen behind the screen door, wide-eyed. "Is Grandpa fighting the army?" Nobody answered. The neighbors had begun to gather, phones in hand, mouths open. Grandpa Hank stood over the two groaning bodies, calm and still. "That's for grabbing me," he muttered. "And for threatening my family." Then, quietly to me, "Call the sheriff. Tell him Echo 6 came home." It took 3 deputies to confirm what we already suspected: these men weren't HOA. They weren't any kind of official. No badges. No ID. The radios on their belts weren't on any known frequencies. One even had a laminated card that looked like it was printed at a gas station. "They're not just fakes," Grandpa said. "They're trained. Poorly, but trained." Sheriff Callahan was furious. 2 criminals impersonating law enforcement under his watch? Unacceptable. But what he didn't expect, what none of us expected, was when Grandpa Hank's name came back flagged. Joseph Henry Delaney, former U.S. Army, attached to a Cold War-era Black Ops unit, listed only as Task Force Echo. Designation: Echo 6. The next few days were a whirlwind. Footage of Grandpa taking down the imposters went viral. Every network ran the story. Social media blew up with hashtags like Echo 6, Porch Justice, and Grandpa Strikes Back. Some folks made memes. Others made murals. But the truth was darker. Investigators uncovered files on the imposter spreadsheets marking properties of elderly veterans, especially those with intelligence backgrounds. A list. Grandpa's house was circled twice: priority tier 3, high value, low risk. Grandpa read that line aloud. "Low risk," he said, almost amused. "They thought age meant weakness. They were wrong." Then came the call. Secure line. No greeting. "Echo 6, stand down. You are not authorized." "I never needed authorization," Grandpa replied. "They're escalating," I told him. "They already did," he said. A week later, Grandpa left the house wearing an old bomber jacket with the outline of a worn patch on the should-era wing dagger. He had a list. Names. People he once called teammates. "I'm not going to war," he told me. "I'm waking up the others." And just like that, Grandpa Hank became something more. A legend. A symbol. But he never wanted that. All he wanted was peace. And maybe one last walk through the garden before the sun went down.